The seed packages are written with just you walking between each row in mind. So the spacing has enough room for the plant foliage to be there and for you to walk without disturbing the plant too much. But you've changed all the rules when you have this sort of system where you have bed, walking path, bed. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I thought I'd answer another one of those viewer questions. We've got T. Kin, K-I-N, asking, hey Greg, I have a question on spacing. I've started a Ruth Stout bed to be ready for spring planting. I have a decently thick layer of hay and rabbit manure that I've been sprinkling on it for a couple months now. Online research all points to using 15 to 18 inches, I think he's saying, between plants and 30 inches between rows. However, hasn't said what type of plant, but anyway, it really depends on what type of plant. So 15 to 18 inches between plants and 30 inches between rows. However, I notice in most of all your potato videos, okay, I guess he's talking about potatoes. Notice in all your potato videos that you usually just use 9 to 12 inch spacing all around for your seed potatoes. What are your experiences with that? I've ordered more seed potatoes than I should have. 10 of each different 4 varieties. Holy smokes. That's a lot. And 10, I don't know if it's 10 pounds of each 4 or just 10 potatoes of each 4 varieties. Either 40 potatoes or a lot, or 40 pounds of potatoes. Anyway, I'm not sure how close that I can plant them to be able to use them all. What are your general thoughts on spacing? All right, so if we're just talking about potatoes, I think I'll just, blow this video to talk about spacing in general, but I'll talk about potatoes to start with because that's what your question was about. Yes, I tend to plant them in a 12-inch grid. Potato, 12 inches potato, 12 inches potato, 12 inches potato, over 12, potato, 12, potato, right? So like a chessboard. Because I just figure when you pick them, when you've mulched your potato bed, if you grow them the way I do, I find that each potato plant, you rarely find potatoes, the potatoes tend to grow out. The diameter of the potatoes that are produced from the planted potato tends to be, I don't know, 16 inches, 12 inches, that sort of thing. So I found that the foliage that the plants put out, if they're planted in that grid, potato, 12 potato, 12 potato, each plant seems to get enough light, right? Because they're enough, and I don't plant it in a hexagonal sort of pattern. They're in it just like a chessboard where each intersection of a line, right? That sort of thing. I'm hoping making sense. So I found that each potato seems to get enough space to get all the sun it needs to, get about 10 potatoes per plant, which is that's the best ratio. I'm sure there's people that get better ratios than that, but 10 potatoes per plant for me is good. That's a 10-to-1 return. You're not going to get better than that in any stock market. So you get a good return. Each potato is going to get the light it needs, and all the potatoes are going to intermesh enough that it really blocks the light out from the ground, so you really don't get a lot of weeds, right? The potatoes just sort of crowd out the whole bed. So for me, I find that to be the optimum spacing for potatoes, okay? And it seems to work just fine for me. I've never had any, I didn't buy potatoes last year. I don't think I'm going to have to buy them this year, right? So, that's good. Now, for other plants, again, this all depends on the plant, right? A plant like a zucchini, I plant them almost like that says. I would have, if I had a garden that was 4 feet by 10 feet long, I would plant a zucchini, maybe every 18 inches, and I would have them almost 2 feet apart. Because a zucchini plant's huge, maybe 3 feet in, it needs almost a 3-foot diameter, a 1.5 foot radius, right? It's a large plant. So you got to think about how big is the plant that's going to grow, and what is the radius of the mature plant, and how much space is each plant going to need to get the sun it needs relative to the other plants. Also, with some plants like a kale, if they're in really tight together, it can really harbor pests. So you want to have them spaced out even more. so that more light can get in there and discourage the pests. Because like a kale plant, there's slugs and snails. They kind of like shade. So if the plants are, if the plant leaves are intermeshing and they're creating a shady place, a nice, safe, shady place, you're going to get more pest damage than if each plant is more on its own, right? Every once in a while, I'll have a rogue kale plant just come out in my walking paths. It's usually 100% pest-free, and that's because it's so exposed to the light. It's a very rough neighborhood for any sort of slug or snail. And if that plant does get attacked by a pest of some kind, it's usually because some other plant growing near it has actually leaned in and started creating shade. So there's that. Another point is that a lot of seed packages and directions online, so I mean, you really have to think about the advice you're getting online and the source. Is the person a highly experienced gardener, right? Or is the person just a professional writer that's just repeating something they read somewhere, right? It's really useful to get advice, like the great thing about YouTube, and I'm not the greatest expert in the world, but you can see the person's results, right? If you're getting all this writing from a gardener, and then when you actually see their garden, it's like a tiny suburban garden in a tiny backyard. They had, it's clear they're not growing a lot of different things. They probably don't have their wealth of experience that a person with a very, very large garden, especially like an older person, is going to give. I tend to, all the books I tend to recommend people for gardening are people that are written by people in their 60s that have spent their whole life gardening, and they have large gardens. And if you see pictures of their gardens, it's clear they know what they're doing. So there's that. Another issue is that, a lot of seed packs and recommendations are based on commercial gardening requirements, right? So like for a potato or something like that, they're recommending a spacing that is amenable to machine picking, to tilling, to tilling between rows, to mechanization, right? So that's, of course, the more space you have between plants, the plants doesn't have to compete for any sort of, the plants get the run of the show. It's going to get all the sun it needs. So, I mean, spacing's great, right? I'm not saying spacing isn't bad. Spacing's great because the plant gets all the sun, all the water, all the nutrients. It gets a nice air and light. So spacing's great. But if you're, trying to get the most out of the space you have, and you're sort of trying to get that optimal, I've got a limited space. I can't expand my space, so I got to get the most I can out of the space. If you're trying to optimize, which I imagine most backyard gardeners are in that situation, then a lot of the seed package recommendations, you can go off that script a little bit, because in many instances they're talking about optimum growth, or ideal spacing for some sort of mechanized setup. Or that sort of thing. So, or, depending on, the method of gardening being used, the instructions may not be given with the no-till mulched type garden in mind, right? It's a different kind of setup, right? The soil tends to have more moisture in it, right? The soil tends to have more stable moisture levels. So you can bend a lot of rules. I mean, there's a limit to everything, right? But you can bend a lot of rules in a no-till garden that's perpetually mulched, because you're just cultivating a different kind of soil, a different kind of soil community, and your soil is capable of working with the plants in ways that a conventional garden may or may not be capable of doing. I'm sounding a bit like a Swami here, but that's my experience, and there's other people that say it as well. I have no scientific data to back that up. But I mean, like these carrots, for instance. For things like carrots, I tend to use my own hand span as a gauge, which is like 8 or 9 inches. So the rows are going this way, and I planted them, so the rows are going this way, and each row was planted a hand span apart, 9 inches. And I got some nice carrots, and these ones I didn't even space. And if I can get this guy out without him breaking. That one came in a bit weird, but yeah, I got some nice ones, right? Right, perfectly fine carrots. Right, these should have been spaced, but over here, these are Will this guy come out? Oh, of course he won't come out. These guys are all lumped in together, but I got a nice, got here. Yeah, there's a 2-incher, right? So, yeah, I'm fine with the results I'm getting, right? And I've got some that are this diameter and about this long in here, right? And the package did not say plant each carrot an inch apart. Plant the carrots an inch apart and plant the rows 9 inches apart. It had much wider spacings recommended on the packaging, but in my experience, a thing like a carrot, the optimal spacing for a carrot or a parsnip, each plant should be about 3 inches apart. You should thin them to that. And for me, the rows, 9 inches. I wouldn't go any wider than 9 inches because I've never seen an advantage from going wider than that. Now, here's another point. A lot of garden recommendations. They're for the conventional type of garden, not a no-till garden. So in a no-till garden, you've got a bed and a walking path and a bed. So a lot of those spacings, they're recommending those spacings between rows because you're supposed to walk between the rows, right? So when you've got this sort of no-till system where you've got bed, walking path, bed, you're not walking between your rows, you're walking between your beds. So the seed package, that's a key point. I should have led with that, I suppose. The seed packages are written with just you walking between each row in mind. So the spacing has enough room for the plant foliage to be there and for you to walk without disturbing the plant too much. But you've changed all the rules when you have this sort of system where you have bed, walking path, bed, right? You've got a place to walk. So you can have your rows really close to one another because you're not walking in here at all. I hope you're not, right? This is no walking allowed space, right? So you don't have to walk between your rows. They can be a lot closer. It's more about thinking about the plant, how much space it needs for its foliage to get all the sun it needs, and how much space the plant needs for the roots to get everything that plant needs, the water and the nutrients, and that sort of thing. And also bearing in mind, depending on what you're growing, what's the optimal space in terms of decreasing the risk of pest damage. I'm lucky, I don't find anything other than chipmunks seems to attack my carrots, so I can plant them pretty close together, right? If I had a real bad pest problem, I might space them out. I found for a lot of pests, spacing seems to solve a lot of problems. If you're somewhere where there's a lot of different, natural predators of pests, knocking about sort of thing, if you make your garden, a bit of a, what's that called? If you make your garden a great place for those predators to come and, find their prey, they'll tend to remember where you are and keep coming back, right? Because it's an easy meal. So like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Make your garden a kill zone from the sparrow's point of view, because it's going to come in and it's going to sort out a lot of your pests, and it's not going to be a problem for you. You're not going to have to use, various other solutions that are either more costly, expensive, or toxic or whatever. So I hope that answers your question. I kind of rambled about there, and I'm tend to speaking in generalities. But I think that's the best way to think about this. Think about what category your plant's in, what its needs are, and then, sure, read the seed package, but bear in mind that there's a certain, mentality put into that. But think about, if you're growing a beet, think like a beet. What do I need if I'm a beet? Well, it's probably going to get, some beets get 4 inches in diameter, but let's say 3 inches in diameter. It's going to get 3 inches in diameter. The root's going to get 3 inches in diameter. So each beet needs to be, maybe 4 or 5 inches apart, right? And, the foliage is going to go up. It's going to be about, 1.5 feet, maybe even 2 feet high. It might have a 2-foot radius. So the rows need a certain spacing. Actually, I tend to space my beets very similar to the way I space my potatoes. Because I don't find beets to get attacked by pests anywhere near as much as kale do. And same thing with Swiss chard. But then there's other varieties, like the giant 4-hook Swiss chard is a huge plant. So it needs a bit more space than Lucillus, for instance, which is a smaller but arguably better tasting kind of Swiss chard. So anyway, I'm starting to go all over the place here, so I think I'll bring it to a close. But T. Ken, I hope that answers your question, or anyone else out there that's got a similar question in mind. So yeah, spacing, it depends on the plant, depends on the risks, depends on what you're trying to do. But the seed pack is a good guide, but don't experiment, play around, right? You can bend the rules a little bit and see what happens, especially if you've got a no-till garden. You can bend the rules because the rules were not written with your style of garden in mind. So hope you found it interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.